when she was doing that giveaway for the tickets for Pop-Up Magazine, it reminded me of one of my favorite podcasts. It's from WBZ. It's a podcast called Making Oprah. Who's heard it? So Making Oprah is awesome because it basically takes you through how Oprah became a star. And there is a section of one of the episodes in which they recount the story of her now iconic car episode, where she gives the entire audience a car. So they're talking to the production staff about how they prepared for this the night before. And Oprah, in her majestic wisdom, does this walkthrough of the venue the night before. And they have the box with the keys, right? And they're like, Oprah, we got it all together. And Oprah picks up the box, and she shakes it. And she says, you need tape. If the keys shake, they'll know it's a car key. She's a genius. So anyways, that made me think of that. I usually think about Oprah once a day. So, it's good to be here. My name is Sam Sanders. I'll tell you more about who I am in a second, but I gotta be clear with two things that you should know about me before I start. One, I think I put my contacts in the wrong eyes today. Left is in right, right is in left, so if I'm squinting, it's because I think you're all beautiful, but also I can't see. Two, I don't usually dress up. I have a work uniform. I wear black jeans and a chambray shirt every day to work because it's one less thing to think about. I got dressed up for you all today, and just know that I feel like a dog with shoes on. You know, where they just don't know how to function. So bear with me. Anyway, that is not my full name. My full name is Samuel Houston Sanders III. Right? It's all a sham. My father's name is not Samuel. His name is Reuben. I think there's a distant relative somewhere in the line who had the name Samuel Houston Sanders. But my parents thought they wanted to give me that name, and they thought having a 3 at the end would be regal AF. So here we are. I am Samuel Houston Sanders III. Anywho, a bit more about me. I am from the great state of Texas. Who here is from Texas? Thank you for being here. From San Antonio, Texas, home of the San Antonio Spurs, best team in the league. I don't care what you say about that. I believe it. They're great. I am also living right now in downtown Los Angeles. In my opinion, the greatest neighborhood in the world. I love it there. Downtown, give it up. I've been working for NPR for close to a decade. Since 2009, I began as a fellow, and then I was a producer, and then I produced and reported breaking news for many years. So I was at many natural disasters and shootings and all that stuff. But before this current job I have at NPR, I was a political reporter, a campaign reporter for about a year and a half. Already said hello, sorry. And during the campaign, okay, this is a slide about me. During the campaign, I traveled with lots of candidates and was on the trail and spent a lot of time with a guy called Bernie Sanders. After he left the race, I covered Trump, and I covered Hillary, and I covered Ted Cruz, and I covered Jeb Bush, which is so pathetic. Poor Jeb, please clap. Anywho, now I host my own show. It is called It's Been a Minute. Who here has heard of it? Thank you. We're a twice-a-week podcast and a once-a-weekend radio show. An hour mashup of those 2 weekly podcast episodes is heard on about 220 public radio stations across the country, including LA's own Pasadena's own KPCC, Saturday nights at 9 p.m. This show, the best way I can describe it is NPR letting me talk to cool and smart people about the news of the day and the ideas shaping our world. The Friday episodes are me in conversation with other journalists and calling up listeners to talk about the big headlines of the week. The Tuesdays are deep dives. I'm in conversation with actors, directors, authors, whoever. It's fun, check it out, maybe, I don't know. There's too many podcasts though, so I'm not gonna make you listen. Anywho, back to the job that I had before this one, when I was covering the election. I was usually on the road 3 or 4 times a month. I was on the campaign plane or the campaign bus. I was at rallies here and there. It was nerve-wracking, it was insane, it was crazy. And I did that thing that most political reporters do, where you force yourself to become, with all things, breaking news and politics. And so I remember once Donald Trump became the GOP nominee, the first thing I would do every morning would check Twitter and see what he said, check news alerts, see what he did. And then every night before I went to bed, I would check Twitter, see what he said, check news alerts, see what he did. This was every day, for months, for months, for months. Donald Trump was the first thing I thought about every morning and the last thing I thought about every night. I was in a committed relationship with Donald Trump, and I don't even think he knew. Who in here found yourself in the same position during the election season of 2016? Raise your hand, don't be shy. It's true, it happened to us. It happens to us, we did that, it was really weird. How many of you still find yourself in that same position today? It's okay, it's okay, say it, say it. All right, so we as a nation, we as a news industry, we have become obsessed with our commander-in-chief. This is the chaos that I would like to talk about today. Let me be clear here and say right off the bat, we're going to be working from one general assumption this morning. Donald Trump is a chaos president. Donald Trump is the chaos president. Donald Trump is the chaos president. This is not a partisan statement. Even his strongest supporters admit that he is unpredictable and erratic and quick to surprise even his strongest allies. He contains an innate, some could call genius, ability to totally create a news cycle with just a tweet or an offhand remark. Even though most of his critics will acknowledge all of those things are reasons they don't like him, his supporters will say that they voted for him just because of all of those things. Just because he really, really knows how to shake things up. Just because he is chaos. So, I'm in the clear calling Donald Trump and his presidency and his White House chaotic. Chaos. It's not partisan, just is, okay? So, in the midst of a chaotic election season and now a chaotic presidency and ever chaotic news cycles, I think we can all agree that it seems sometimes all the time, that we are living in a constant state of chaos. Whoever feels that way. Yeah. The chaos of this presidency has infused our own public discourse, and now we are all, it seems, as chaotic and angry as the president himself. Raise your hands if you agree. All right. I'm not gonna have you guys raise your hands anymore. I realize that's a lot of raising the hands, I'm sorry. But in this kind of news cycle, think about how your days sometimes go. I'm gonna tell you how my days sometimes go. A breaking news alert every 2 minutes, a new tweet every 3, another day, another list of things to be outraged about online. You, stranger on the internet, are too politically correct, let's fight. You, stranger on the internet, are not woke enough, let's fight. Hashtag MAGA, hashtag resist, hashtag take a knee, hashtag respect the whatever. Tap, tap, scroll, scroll, tap, tap, scroll, scroll, like, reply, repeat, 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 repeat. We are living in a constant state of chaos. Every day. You know it, I know it. Chaos. And I should be clear here, it's not just the president who's doing this to us. There's more. Increasing rates of severe weather across the globe. Mass shootings. Racial tension and violence, stories of women abused at all levels of society, great national debates over whether or not Bert and Ernie are gay. I could go on. But let's be real here. Are Bert and Ernie gay? Is the sky blue? They're gay. Anyway, chaos. It's too much. Too many bad stories, too much information, too much hate and anger on the internet. Too much. In large part because of our president's temperament. Also in large part due to the stories in the news cycle themselves. And also in large part due to the industry, my own, that covers these stories. We are also part of the chaos. And there is proof now that this chaos is literally wearing us all out. There was a Pew study from earlier this year that found that almost 7 in 10 Americans, some 68%, feel worn out by the amount of news there is these days, compared with only 3 in 10 who say they like the amount of news they get. The portion expressing feelings of information overload is in line with how Americans also felt during the campaign season in 2016. Another thing, this is of NPR listeners. In our own audience, NPR digital users are 49% more likely to spend 20 to 29 hours a week on Twitter. We have made arguing on Twitter our part-time jobs. That's crazy. You know it's crazy. It's crazy. So dare I say, as a journalist, we are newsed out, living in the news all the time, and living with the chaotic presidency that has just about broken every record for news coverage. It has all put us in a state of constant chaos. Constant. But let me tell you the one thing that I know about chaos. The one thing I know for sure about chaos, that I believe to my very, very core. We are not meant to live that way. We are not meant to live in chaos. We weren't designed for it. We weren't made for it. We are not meant to live in a state of constant chaos. We are not meant to be this angry all the time. It's not right. It's not healthy. It is bad for us. We are not meant to consume life through social media scrolls. Life cannot be one big nonstop breaking news alert. Life cannot be one never-ending stream of trending hashtag. There is more to it than just that. Knowing that, I want to tell you all how I stopped the chaos for myself. Still a work in progress. So, after the election, after the inauguration, I got a new assignment. I left NPR Politics, and the folks in our division that makes podcasts said, Sam, go make a new show. So me and my good colleague and friend, Brent Bachman, our producer extraordinaire, we got to sit in dark rooms and studios for months and just try new stuff until something stuck. And all of a sudden I realized in that new role, I didn't have to be tied to breaking news. My schedule became more flexible, and all of a sudden, I didn't need to check Twitter and news alerts first thing in the morning to see what he said or did overnight. I didn't need to, before I went to bed, check Twitter and news alerts just to see if he had done anything else. I got to end my one-sided relationship with Donald Trump, and with Twitter, and with hashtags, and with internet rage. And I told those angry partners that I was going to change the relationship. And maybe it was for the best if we didn't talk to each other every day, or perhaps got to see some other people. I began to delete Twitter from my phone for just a few hours at a time. But then I would do it for like a night at a time. And then I would do it for the whole weekend. And then I would say, this week I'm not doing Twitter at all. It was amazing. I began to consume the news differently. I would check in on the news of the day in the morning when I felt like it, but then I would move on. I would move on. I would get a handle of the big stuff, and then I would just stop trying to know everything and be involved in every online conversation. I began to try just a bit to live a life outside of my phone, outside of those breaking news alerts. And let me tell you, dear audience, it worked. It is working. The chaos has begun to subside, and I will tell you another secret. I do not think that any of that has made me a worse journalist. I think it made me better. So, what I'm saying to you today is that I want you, as well, to lead the chaos, or at least put it down for a little bit, right? I have some ideas on how to do this, but first let me be clear. In another talk, I would say that in many ways it's up to the news media to fix this problem of chaos, right? We kind of did this to you guys. We have newsed ourselves to a breaking point. We have told our news consumers that everything deserves all of their attention all the time. We have convinced ourselves that all the news is always breaking all the time. But think about that. If all the news is always breaking all the time, we are broken too. If all the news is always breaking all the time, we are broken too. We can't do that. I actually did a story at the end of 2016 about news fatigue. I talked to some smart folks that think about these things, and I want to read a bit of it to you now. I spoke with Amy Mitchell. She is the director of journalism research at the Pew Research Center. And she says that what we've seen in news consumption trends over the last few years has actually, physiologically, I messed that word up, but it's changed us. As people, it's changed us. She said, quote, "A lot of the shift to online is presenting a news experience that is more mixed in with other kinds of activities. You don't necessarily go online looking for news each and every time. Somebody shares it, somebody emails it to you, somebody texts a link. And so many Americans are bumping into the news throughout the course of the day." I talked also with Nikki Usher. She's a professor of media and public affairs at GW in DC. And she calls this recent phenomenon ambient journalism. Basically, when you're constantly plugged in through social media and breaking news alerts, where you're always engaged in some way and you're literally swimming in news all day. The thing about this bumping into the news all day, this swimming in the news all day, over time, that becomes an assault, an actual assault. We're not just consuming the news is punching us in the face. The news is walking to us every day and saying, hey, I'm the news. Did you see it? That's crazy. So, how do we change this? I have a few ideas. One, understand that you cannot change. No, I'm not there yet. Wait. Sorry. All right, one, how do we change that? I think the first step is accepting, and I say this as a journalist, accepting that the news media industry is not going to change this for you. We're not going to change it for you. If I was in charge, I would, but I'm not. It's just too profitable. A thing you may have realized by this point is that every major national newsroom in the country has experienced and continues to experience what's been called a Trump bump. More ratings, more revenue, more eyeballs, more ears. Keeping news consumers, and this doesn't leave this room, keeping news consumers plugged into this constant state of chaos is good for business. I said it. So, don't rely on the news media writ large to stop this. It's up to you. It's up to me, as someone who lives outside the news too. Here are the ways that I think we can start to stop the chaos. Now I can go to the next slide. Sorry about that. One, understand that you cannot change everything. I'll tell you a secret. Most of the time, your tweet means nothing. Absolutely effing nothing. Your action does. If you're angry about or alarmed about the state of the world, the most effective way to change it is not through your tweet, not through arguing with strangers online. It is through using two things, your body and your money. Volunteer, march, physically be in a space to help, or give money to the causes you believe in. Those are, over the history of our time, the most effective ways to make change. We have convinced ourselves that hashtag activism is activism. It's not. It's not. And the thing that happens when we begin to try to change things through our bodies and our money is that we realize both of these resources are finite. You can't go to every march. You can't give to every cause. And that's the way it's supposed to be, because you can't change everything. You're one person. Taking myself out of the online world and being more in the real world has reminded me of that. You can't change everything. Okay? Next thing I would say to do to begin to stop the chaos is to, darn it. I'm so bad with slides. There we go. Second thing, understand that you will never know everything. How many of you guys have seen that Portlandia skit? Have you read? So it's these two way too smart yuppies in some coffee shop or restaurant in Portland. And they're asking if this one read that New Yorker article, or did you read that Atlantic article? And then it becomes this argument, basically, of them screaming over and over and over, have you read, have you read, have you read, have you read, have you read? Don't be those guys. Fight the urge to be the most well-informed in your friend group. Fight the urge to one-up strangers on the internet with something they didn't know. We can never know it all. And the more we tell ourselves that we can, the more that our knowledge of the world becomes shallow and not deep. Thank you. Next, understand that you don't have to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. I take no credit for this. I saw a friend post on Instagram, it looked smart, I stole it. I'll say it again though, understand that you don't have to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. How many of you have gone down that rabbit hole of seeing some weird dispute in some high school somewhere in Idaho where lines are drawn and sides are taken and all of a sudden you're invested in that fight? I've been there. We've all been there. The internet has convinced us that other people's battles are our own. They're not. Your battle is your battle. Only your battle is your battle. The last thing I would say, the last tip I would have for you all is if I don't get these slides. Okay. The last thing I would say to you all is you have to understand that the internet is not the real world. It's not, it's not, it's not. I'm gonna tell you guys a story that reminds me all the time that it's not. Who remembers during the campaign season in 2016, there was a mass shooting in Dallas after a Black Lives Matter rally? Remember that? And someone in the crowd began to try to shoot police officers. It was tragic, it was awful. I'll never forget, it was the night before I was supposed to go cover the DNC Rules Committee meeting in Orlando. But I saw the news of this tragedy and I became obsessed with it. I've covered race in all my work for years. I've covered the Black Lives Matter movement. This issue means a lot to me personally for many reasons, for many obvious reasons. So I began to scroll Twitter and see what the hell was going on with this shooting. And before the names of the victims were announced, before the death tolls were announced, before we even knew what the response was going to be, online, it seemed as if America was preparing to launch head-on into a race war. It was so awful. It was so nasty. I remember, against the better angels of my nature, I went outside to the stoop outside of my apartment, and I sat on Twitter, scrolling and scrolling and crying and chain smoking. And then I emailed my editor around midnight and said, you know what? I need to go to Dallas. I'm not going to Florida. I want to cover this story. If there's a race war, damn it, I'm gonna see it. And they said, okay, go to Dallas. And as soon as I got there, they wanted us to tape an episode of the NPR Politics podcast. And they said, Sam, we want you to be in the spot where things are happening to be in the podcast. So immediately, I went to the scene of the crime, which was taped off. I went to where a vigil had just taken place. I went to Dallas Police Department headquarters and hung out with folks there. And everywhere I went, I kept saying, there's no race war. I was told by the internet that there was a race war. It's gonna win my Peabody Award covering this shit. No race war. I will never forget, mourners had started to gather outside of the headquarters of the Dallas Police Department. And police officers put out a few squad cars because people began to lay wreaths and flowers and tributes and cards for the officers that were slain. And there were a lot of officers milling about, but there was one who had taken charge, and he'd become this almost counselor for everyone there. This black guy, I forget his name, late 30s, tall, full of charisma, and everyone that came there to mourn was just drawn to him. And he took all this time to hug people and talk with them, and take pictures with them. He was leading this city in its mourning, and this city had come together in this way that you would not have ever seen online, right? The thing that I saw online was not happening there. And I'll never forget this young woman, Latina, maybe 18 or 19 years old. She wore this ballroom gown, long blue flowing ballroom gown. And she had a sash on that said Dallas. And she had a dozen roses. And she would lay a rose at each car, and then she would hug every cop. And then she came to the main cop who was in charge, leading the mourning. And they hugged for so long. And then I said to myself, as I cried out there, I don't think we're as angry as we think we are. I don't think the internet is the real world. I don't think that's true. That this is true, right? I will never forget how strong the sense of love and unity was in the midst of this tragedy, in the midst of everyone's different ages and races and incomes and social levels. There were people coming together. We don't see that when we see the world through our phones. We don't see it when we see the world through hashtags. We can't feel it through our phones. The only way to see the real world and to see that we aren't as angry as we think we are is to be in the real world. To step out of the chaos, to stop the scroll, to stop the taps, to stop the breaking news alerts, to turn off the push notifications. We have to do it. And I love telling that story about Dallas because it reminds me that even in what we think are the most chaotic events of our time, we can leave the chaos, we can leave the brokenness, and we should leave the chaos. So, my challenge to you as you leave this place today is not just to put your phone down more, but to think about the one person in your friend group, in your family, at your job. Think of the one person who always seems as if they don't know what the hell just happened. Think of the one person who never has a handle on current events. Think of the one person that might forget who's president from day to day. And ask yourself, what if, on some level, they've got it figured out? What if, on some level, they have chosen to live a life outside of their screens? What if they've stopped the chaos? Find that person after this, talk to them about their news consumption habits. I'm serious. With that, I would just remind you all, and I'll say it again, chaos is here. It is with us. It is exhausting. If all the news is always breaking, we are broken too. But the great thing about it is that we can unbreak ourselves. We can stop the chaos, and we should.